Energy, Climate Change and Resource Efficiency. Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan, Chair B20 India Task Force on Tech, Innovation and R&D. Mr. Dinesh Kumar Khara, Chair B20 India Task Force on Financial Inclusion for Economic Empowerment. Mr. R. Dinesh, the President of the Confederation of Indian Industry. Mr. Rajesh Gopinathan, Co-Chair, B20 India Task Force on Digital Transformation, and Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, DG CII. Leading the discussion with the 9 task force chairs is Mr. N. Chandrasekharan, the Chair of the B20 India. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists and our Chair for B20 India, Mr. Chandrasekharan. I'd like to now invite the Director General of the Confederation of Indian Industry, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, to please welcome all our delegates, guests, and speakers, and to give the introductory remarks.
The chairs and the co-chairs of all the B20 India groups, the members of the B20 International Advocacy Caucus, very, very distinguished speakers, business leaders from across the world, many, many government officials, the team of the G20, the Sherpa, excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. A very special welcome to all of you to the B20 Summit in India, with a very strong participation of over 1,500 leaders from across the world. In the last 9 months, B20 India has been involved in creating 54 very strong recommendations with 172 policy enablers, and all under the guidance of the 10 leaders that you see on the dais this morning, and a phenomenal team of business leaders from across the world, including India. And the attempt has been to ensure that the B20 is inclusive and representative of all the views that we received. Just by way of figures, may I mention that the participation had more than 30% of women leaders from business leaders from around the world, from 35 countries who participated in this, representing more than 25 different business sectors. So at the summit today, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have over 1,700 participants from the businesses across the world, and it represents 55 countries and outstanding speakers in more than 20 sessions over the next 3 days. In the run-up to this event, we had more than 90 different policy advocacy platforms created across the country and also many outside of our country. And those who have added to the different perspectives that have gone into the preparations of the outcome, which will all be reflected in the communique that will be soon released, the B20 India communique. Today, the B20 Summit is also a place for conducting businesses amongst so many of you who have gathered. And therefore, we have more than 600 B2B meetings, which will be scheduled over the next 3 days. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, B20 has come a long way. From the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII was one of the founding associations when B20 was officially formed as an engagement group of G20 way back in 2010. Since then, B20 has evolved and become a stronger voice of the engagement groups of the G20. Reflection of that would be seen when our chairs today present here, they give their outcomes of the content that have been developed in the last 9 months, as I said. So, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, over the next 3 days, we shall have the privilege of hearing some of the best minds from across the world who have come here, assembled here, some of our policymakers, some of our key ministers from India, trade ministers from 14 countries who come over this evening, senior government officials, some of the best global businesses and thought leaders amongst others. And of course, on the last day, that's on Sunday, we'll have the presence of our Honorable Prime Minister. I'm sure we are all eager to hear from our chairs, the task force and the action councils. And before I hand over the floor to Mr. N. Chandrasekharan, the B20 India chairman, may I first felicitate all the chairs for being here one by one. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here.
Mr. Banerjee, if I could request you to please felicitate the B20 India chairperson, Mr. Chandrasekharan, and all our panelists, Ms. Mallika Srinivasan, Ms. Shobana Kamineni, Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan, Mr. Rajesh Gopinathan, Mr. Sajjan Jindal, cutting across the board, Mr. Dinesh Kumar Khara, we're ensuring that you've done your 10,000 steps early in the morning, Mr. Uday Kotak, Mr. Sunil Bharti Mittal, and Mr. R. Dinesh. May I request the B20 chair, Mr. Chandrasekharan, to please felicitate Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, the head B20 India Secretariat and the DGCII. May I now request the B20 India chair, Mr. N. Chandrasekharan, to please set the context of the summit and make the introductory remarks.
Good morning. Distinguished business leaders, excellencies, chairs, co-chairs, and members of the B20 task forces and action councils, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's truly a great privilege to address all of you today, especially during the week that India successfully soft-landed a spacecraft on the moon. The moon has been a symbol of aspiration for a long time. We say, shoot for the moon when we want to strive for the impossible. For a millennia, India's greatest poets have gazed up at the moon and wondered at the unfathomable distance between us and the moon. But today, we see the moon in a new light. Last week, millions and millions of young Indians and those around the world witnessed the landing either on the television or online. For them, the moon has changed from a symbol of aspiration to one of achievement. And now, every night, a simple glance upwards will be a reminder of what we as a nation have accomplished, and more, what we are capable of achieving in the future. Speaking for the future It's wonderful to be here today at the B20 Summit. The summit is a culmination of an intensive 7 months of work, of deliberation, ideation, and most of all, forging ties between the business leaders across the world. This year, the B20 Summit is guided by the overarching theme of G20 India, Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, or One Earth, One Family, and One Future, under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi ji. The vision outlined India's presidency of G20, encompassing partnerships for the people and the planet. A word about India today. We at India stand as a beacon of growth, on track to achieve around 7% average growth over the next decade. As the fifth largest economy in the world, on the way to becoming home to the largest talent reservoir, India is set to contribute greatly to inclusive global development. India positively stands out in the global economy, which is facing strong growth winds, tightest rate cycle in decades, and record levels of public debt. The world currently is navigating through three important fundamental transitions. The first is the digital and artificial intelligence transition, the second, energy transition, and the third, a global value chain, supply chain transition. India is extremely well positioned to lead in all the three. A sentence on each. On the digital and AI transition, India over the last decade has created a fantastic digital infrastructure and has proven public services delivery at large scale. All of us who live here make our payments only digitally. I don't think any of us carry cash. Not a day goes without looking for multiple OTPs. And that's the kind of success we have had, and with a strong talent base, it is very natural for us to make and lead this transition. On the energy transition, most of the energy we need over the next 3 decades, that's almost 2/3 or 3/4 of the energy we need, we will have to create. So India will be creating the new energy for growth and will not be substituting the old energy. So that makes it easy to transition, and more importantly, that makes it most exciting and economically much more interesting for all investors. And the third, the current geopolitical shifts and a large domestic market in India, and the global presence of companies in India, and the strong talent base that we have, makes it very compelling for India to lead the creation of an alternative supply chain. So India has many things that goes in its favor. Also, the transformative government initiatives such as the public digital infrastructure, the PM Gati Shakti, the PLI incentive schemes, the Startup India, reduction in corporate taxes, and many of these initiatives are helping India sustain the fantastic economic momentum that we have among the G20 countries. But at the same time, India and all of us here are super committed to equitable growth, particularly in the global south, committed to sustainability and climate action, committed to innovation. And therefore, India's growth journey will shape the world's future. So all of these thoughts that I talked about went into the actions that we wanted to take during the B20 India's leadership. When we took over the presidency from Indonesia in November last year, we aimed to build on the great work done by them and also to create new pathways for finding solutions to some of the world's pressing problems. At the start of our presidency, after a lot of collaborative discussions, we came up with the slogan, RAISE, which is being responsible, accelerated, innovative, sustainable, and equitable growth for all businesses among G20 and outside G20 nations. Through a consultative process, we engaged stakeholders across the world and came up with 9 themes, and we formed them as 7 task forces and 2 action councils. The task forces worked on the themes of global economic recovery, inclusive global value chains for resilient trade and investment, financial inclusion for economic empowerment, digital transformation, collaborative work in technology, innovation and research, and future of work that is required in terms of skilling and mobility, and finally energy, climate change and resource efficiency. The 2 action councils worked on embedding ESG in every business, and the second one on integrating Africa's economic development with the global economy. Since we started this work in January in right earnest, we have had about 110 policy advocacy sessions and initiatives across 29 locations in India and abroad. Today, I am delighted to say that we have a very strong set of recommendations. In total, 54 recommendations across these 9 themes, and each of those recommendations have got policy actions, multiple policy actions numbering 172. These 54 recommendations and 172 policy actions have come out of the consensus that has been achieved across over 1,400 participants who have actively engaged to work with the task forces, action councils, and through the International Advisory Caucus. We have received enormous support, feedback, pushbacks, and engagement to get a set of recommendations which are sharp and which can make an impact. While each of the chairs of the task forces and action councils have led from the front, and they will have the opportunity to share directly the work that has been done and the recommendations out of their task forces, I thought I will call out a few important recommendations, more the themes of the recommendations, and then the follow-ups that we want to do going forward. The first that came across as a theme across all the 9 aspects is the concept of inclusion. It resonated across the board. So our recommendations request the G20 to prioritize inclusion relating to least developed economies, global value chains, access to finance, and access to digital literacy. We have incorporated the priority of gender development in all our task forces and action councils. We want to make sure that we measure the progress of women in all dimensions, whether it is in entrepreneurship, whether it is in skill development, whether it is in investment, trade, across every dimension, we want to see notable progress on gender diversity. The second, we have advocated strongly for financing for global recovery and for climate transition. The SDG financing is assuming a central role and needs a coordinated global response. We also have specific callouts for promoting the growth of MSMEs across all nations by providing them the necessary financial support and all other policy support that is required so that the MSME growth will become fundamental to drive the global economy. Third is about skill development and global capacity building and workforce mobility in order to address the needs of a digital future and new technologies that will be required for energy transition and Industry 4.0 overall. Fourth, the G20 will accord, we have requested G20 to accord higher priority to the needs of Global South in all our deliberations, particularly in financial support. The B20 agenda explored the global value chain resilience and how to bring in least developed economies, MSMEs, women, and youth in the global trading arena. And the sixth, we have also advocated for harmonization of frameworks for ESG, standards in the measurements of climate change, and skills that are required to be uniformly available across the globe by facilitating knowledge sharing, by facilitating movement of mobility, cross-border exchanges. Particularly keep in mind the capabilities that differ between the advanced nations and the emerging economies. Many of these are conceptualized and expanded for the first time. We have also pitched for services to be included. The other point that came out in our deliberations is how do we move forward from just making a policy recommendation to implementation. What is the kind of follow-through that we need to do? The groups deliberated extensively on this, and I'm here to make 4 important mechanisms that I would like to announce today. The first aspect is the institutional architecture to support businesses in the G20 nations and outside for the implementations of the B20 recommendations made this year and in the subsequent years. So we would like to announce a B20 Global Institute. The purpose of the B20 Global Institute is to be an evangelist, is to be a change agent, is to be the knowledge base, thought leader, think tank, with highly experienced people who will work with the B20 nations and B20 chair every year, whichever nation holds the B20 leadership that year, to be able to drive the agenda. It will be a global business institute based in India. A lot of thought has gone in, taking inputs, and to ensure that this institute will provide continuity, will provide the follow-through so that the whole recommendations are tracked and also kept alive by making the changes that are required on an ongoing basis. The second that I would like to announce is we have proposed to expedite the decarbonization financing in the Global South, drawing on the groundwork established by B20 Indonesia. This endeavor harmonizes sector-specific decarbonization strategies with funding, technology support, and knowledge exchange. The third is another important institutional mechanism. B20 India is introducing the concept of the Global Sustainable Development Goals Acceleration Fund. This fund would use private capital to supplement public resources, scaling projects aimed at reaching the 2030 goals, particularly in developing economies. Fourth, we have developed a compendium of use cases for technology deployment that will serve as a guide to economies and businesses for converging technologies with development. As we navigate the challenges of the present, it is important to remember that our actions today have the potential to transform the world into a more prosperous and inclusive one. B20 India's efforts encapsulated in these initiatives reflect our dedication to turning intentions into tangible impacts, fostering positive change for global businesses and society. As we come together for a shared vision of prosperity, let us work hand in hand, ensuring that our collaborations lead not just to economic success, but to a deeper prosperity for all. As we kick off today the summit, I would like to express my personal appreciation to Indonesia for their leadership of the B20 in 2022. Their work helped us as a good platform and helped us sharpen our views, and also focusing on creating a system to monitor and advocate the implementation of the recommendations across cycles on a continuous basis. As we consider our work during the year, I also want to thank our Honorable Prime Minister, under whose vision the B20 was able to achieve both an ambitious and concrete outcome. During the next 2 days, I personally look forward to the recommendations being discussed and hopefully a broader acceptance and consensus among all of you sitting here across 55 countries. And hopefully we will have the opportunity to share this with the trade ministers of the G20 nations who will be here this evening and get their support so that the recommendations can be placed in front of the G20 for their adoption. I also want to thank a lot of governmental support we have received from the ministers of Finance, Commerce and External Affairs and the secretaries of the various departments. With those words, I want to welcome you all once again for an excellent set of discussions that have been planned over the next 2.5 days. And thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chandrasekhan, sir. I'd like to now take the opportunity to invite on stage the G20 India Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, to please join the dignitaries on the stage and jointly unveil the B20 India communique. If I could request all our panelists also to please hold up their copies for a photo opportunity. The B20 India communique, jointly unveiled by our panelists and the Sherpa of G20 India. Thank you very much, Mr. Kant, for joining us for the unveiling. Please take your seats. And with the permission of the chair, B20 India, Mr. N. Chandrasekharan, we'd like to now invite our speakers to please come up and make their presentations. First, I'd like to invite Ms. Mallika Srinivasan, the Chair B20 India Task Force on Inclusive GVCs for Resilient Global Trade and Investment. Ms. Srinivasan. We have a presentation, ma'am, so if you could come to this podium. Or you can do it. Yeah, okay.
Can I have the slides up, please? Good morning. It's an honor to be here today in the midst of an exceptional group of global CEOs, policymakers, trade representatives, academicians, and aspiring young business leaders. At the outset, I'd like to thank each one of my co-chairs on the task force for inclusive GVCs for resilient trade and investment for their invaluable contribution in shaping the policy recommendations. A special note of thanks to all the task force members from across G20 countries for their suggestions, insights that have added richness to the policy document, and for their collaborative engagement that truly reflected the depth of the commitment to our shared objectives. I take pride in the spirit of collaboration that defined our collective efforts. Being a part of this task force has been a profound learning experience, one that has enriched our collective understanding of the complexities of global trade, investment, and diplomacy. Together, we have not only contributed to policy recommendations that I present on behalf of the task force today, but also forged enduring connections and insights that will undoubtedly guide our future endeavors. Driven by the past experience over the last 5 years, when unpredictable events severely disrupted supply chains around the world, building resilient value chains has emerged as a key focus for businesses, an imperative indeed, while simultaneously ensuring sustainability, security, transparency, and inclusion in global value chains. Set against this backdrop, while maintaining the continuity of key recommendations from previous years and taking them a step forward, this year's task force discussions introduced several new, novel, and pivotal concepts that align with the evolving economic and business landscape, and I'd like to touch upon these new areas first. One such focal point is the exploration of the multifaceted benefits that technology offers in the context of trade, addressing challenges and opening new opportunities. The usage of Industry 4.0 tools in trade, encompassing AI, ML, DLT, and blockchain as well, collectively being referred to in the paper as Trade 4.0, has direct measurable benefits in terms of increased efficiency, reduced cost, greater transparency, and predictability, with a resultant enhancement in the resilience of GVCs. In addition, technology offers the opportunity of greater inclusivity in trade, enabling MSMEs and LDCs to participate more effectively in global supply chains. As technology's role in trade expands, so does the looming threat of cybersecurity. This year's discussions have delved into this crucial concern, ensuring we understand the intricate relationship between technology, trade, and the imperative of safeguarding against cyber risks. For the first time at this forum, and I think Chairman already mentioned that, the topic of advancing and diversifying services trade, which is currently growing faster than the goods trade, has been brought into prominent focus. Services is estimated to occupy 1/3 of global trade by 2040, and digitally delivered services today occupy, in developed economies, 2/3 of the overall services trade. Services are also now an integral part of manufactured goods, giving rise to the concept of servicification of manufacturing. This changing composition of global trade has emphasized the criticality of understanding the sector's challenges and engaging in global-level deliberations to formulate effective solutions. The task force has begun the dialogue in worldwide collaboration for resolution. Building on the process of the previous years, the task force has not only upheld existing KPIs from previous cycles, but also introduced new KPIs across all themes. This ensures that the insights and recommendations generated are not only translatable into actionable reality, but also establishes a robust framework for monitoring progress and maintaining continuity in our endeavors across B20 cycles. The new KPIs include human development through food security by tracking the number of undernourished people globally, world population engaging in online purchases and the percentage of population using the internet in LDCs, both towards measuring digital penetration, FDI in services by announced greenfield projects, percentage of LDC share in global exports, and formal MSMEs in developing countries with unmet financial needs, again, both towards measuring inclusivity. At an overall level, the task force paper recommends a path towards value chains that are characterized by resilience, inclusivity, innovation, technology, and sustainability. The task force recommendations emphasize robust and collaborative frameworks, agile regulations, and adaptive strategies along 4 priority themes: building resilient and sustainable global value chains, technology and trade, crossing borders with Industry 4.0, diversifying and advancing the services trade, and fostering inclusive trade for LDCs, MSMEs, women and youth. I'll touch briefly upon each of these recommendations and the policy actions. The first one on building resilient supply chains. As mentioned earlier, resilience has occupied center stage in the business of global value chains. Equipped with insights from the experiences of the disruptions caused by the pandemic and other geopolitical developments, the task force recommends establishment of a collaborative cross-border early warning systems for the detection and mitigation of potential trade disruptions through tech-enabled mechanisms and partnerships. Stress testing of value chains would be an enabler to boost proactive preparedness of GVCs across nations. In the evolution of risk-mitigated strategies, the role of government in infrastructure creation and promoting international cooperation, and that of the private sector in risk-mitigated sourcing and substitutability of materials have been emphasized. Green lanes for food security to avert a humanitarian crisis is recommended in the policy paper. Consistent with previous B20 cycles, this year's task force has has repeated the advocacy for meaningful reform of the WTO, including re-establishment of the appellate body for dispute settlement and the review of the agreement on subsidies and countervailing of Trade 4.0. The task force calls upon the G20 to encourage and facilitate nations to invest in digital infrastructure in emerging economies and in poorly connected regions. The policy recommendations also advocate for facilitating interoperability in standards and protocols for digitizing and exchanging data, thus streamlining digital trade transactions. It urges nations to cooperate to address cybersecurity concerns on a large scale across value chains that transcend borders. Diversifying and advancing the services trade, specific policy actions in the area of services that are aimed to ease the advancement of the services trade relate to the classification of services and the disaggregation of embedded services in manufacturing. Facilitating the secure flow of data through addressing regulatory standards while ensuring privacy and cybersecurity safeguards can unlock new avenues of growth, and the paper stresses this aspect and the need to foster LDC participation in the services trade through investment, mentorship, and skill upgradation. And finally, the fourth recommendation, the inclusivity agenda is at its inflection point today. The economic slowdown, rising inflation, and risks emerging from geopolitical conflicts, if left unaddressed, can trigger millions being pushed into extreme poverty, and the paper calls for addressal of these. LDCs, micro, small, and medium enterprises, women and youth remain underrepresented in a global trade, and the policy paper highlights the criticality to bridge the economic divide faced by these segments through the creation of opportunities, institutions, platforms, skill building, and appropriate regulation. The task force calls for the development of requisite infrastructure and trade financing for the enhanced participation of marginalized trade participants in global trade. A concerted, collaborative, and cohesive effort through inclusive trade and investment policies would be in the true spirit of the concept of the world as one earth, one family, one future. The task force believes that we all together can shape a future where trade and investment flourish, creating a more prosperous, inclusive, and resilient world. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to make sure that we are running our schedule on time, may I request all our speakers to please adhere to the time allotted for your section. I'd like to now request the Chair B20 India Task Force on Future of Work, Skilling and Mobility, Ms. Shobana Kamineni, to please make her presentation.
Hi, thank you. In the interest of time, shall I just sit here and I have just 2 slides? Cool. Okay, thank you. Good morning to everyone, and really must say that it's been such a great experience. I want to thank the chair, B20 India, Mr. Chandrasekharan, for asking me to lead this. It's been a great learning, and working with my co-chairs and global experts in this field has really opened my vision and also insights into this. So I hope that in the next couple of minutes I can contribute and tell you what we actually did. We opened the innings really strong in November when India took over. We have 179 members on from G20 countries, the 20 G20 countries and 7 other countries. So I think very, very diverse people in this. Their active contribution and inputs created multiple drafts, and the policy paper we ensured was both robust and had sharp recommendations. One thing I can tell you, Chandra and Mr. Kant, this is probably the shortest document you would have got. We kept it under 60 pages, and we said, let's make this. into an interaction that would actually, that would help the ministers, be able to conclude a policy on this. So we just took 3 frameworks, and I want to dive straight in. So we did the future of work, skilling, and mobility. We used these 3 sharp pillars, of course, under the RAISE framework, and then said, what could we do? And we have from there just 7 recommendations. So what is this thing about the first pillar, which is the future of work? So the nature of work, as all of you know, has really changed, not just post-pandemic, but actually whatever we've been experiencing, whether it's generative AI or technology and conflict and population rise. So the nature of work, the nature of workplaces also has drastically changed. And I do not want to get into it because all of you as business leaders have been dealing with this and understanding and rapidly shifting. And the third is the nature of the workforce is experiencing dynamic changes also in terms of concentration. So there's a need now to recognize and enable diverse forms of work, including open-ended gig workers, fixed-term, agency, part-time, and the self-employed work, as well as a means, how do you organize them? And the platform workers, they're flexible work markets now. And all these are crucial for all our businesses to enable them to respond to the changing markets and for future disruptions. So there's a whole context of what we needed to do under this pillar. The second pillar I want to move on to is really about skilling. And if you see, according to the World Economic Forum, 50% of employees worldwide will need reskilling just by 2025. And even in the longevity of the workforce today, as many countries, are experiencing, it's not just about the first skill you learn, but it's probably in your life cycle, the many skills that you will continue to learn and upskill and reskill. And this is something that needs to be recognized and codified. And this understanding of both business enterprise as well as a workforce for the emerging skill needs a thorough reskilling and upskilling a framework of how we define it and how can we make it much more robust to increase productivity. By emphasizing the significance of skilling, we can proactively respond to the changing demands and really seize the many opportunities. Now, the third pillar is mobility, and I think that this resonates in this world of migration, of conflict, and of climate change. So many of these have forced migration. In India, of course, I think it's part of our life that people move from the villages and they come to cities looking for jobs. But now what we realize is that in a global world, for instance, just to give you one data point, is that India by 2030 will have the world's most, in the age group of the most productive, 38% of people will be dependent on living with families. So the rest of them, so this has changed almost by double in the last 20 years. So in the last in the next 7 years, we're going to be producing so many more people for the workforce. And I think that the ability, and this is the same with many countries in the global south, that we can actually offer aging populations an ability, if there's enough mobility in there, how do we open those doors? And what do we need to do to be able to create an environment where not just state to state, but actually how do we move across countries and continents? That would be really I think the North Star for this particular pillar. And into that, I think it's important that we've given 7 recommendations, Chandra. And the first one is developing a framework for defining jobs of the future. And this is key because unless you can define it, how can you actually go about implementing it? So this definition is something that we all agreed on. 2 is bridging the formal and informal workforce divide. 3, accelerating workforce skilling to adapt to changing industry demands. 4, especially in the post-COVID scenario, ensuring mental well-being of the workforce. This has emerged as actually a great thrust area. 5, removing policy barriers and leveraging technology to enable cross-border mobility. 6, boosting global workforce mobility to match skill demand and supply. And finally, taking the initial steps to build a universal labor information management system, this ontology. So, you know, when you're creating this, the center of excellence that you're creating for B20, I think this would really become a very important part of what India would continue to give in the B20 moving forward. So to conclude, I'd like to emphasize again that we were dedicated to give you tangible outcomes. We hope that it's been very effective, that and there was a lot, actually there was quite a bit of debate, and I want to thank the CII Secretariat that was just outstanding, and of course Accenture that helped pull all these, 179 different members, and each one was pulling in a different way. We put it together, and I think that we made it really practical for everyone out here, because we're all business people. We need something, because we realize that, you know, if we can create a productive workforce, I think there's no better beginning to a true Vasudeva Kudumbakam. If everyone is productive, all the rest will actually flow well, that we can give proper jobs and livelihoods. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Kamineni. May I now request Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan, Chair B20 India Task Force on Tech, Innovation and R&D, to make a very brief presentation, sir. We have a request to all our speakers to please shorten their presentations to just 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. You know, technology is the key driver for change, and collaboration on innovation and R&D is the way to combine our collective intent to actions, goals into results, and challenges into opportunities. With this, the mission of the Task Force on Tech, Innovation and R&D was tasked to leverage the capabilities of the B20 to promote sustainable development goals through affordable solutions and global scale business models. The task force was anchored by leaders from different B20 countries and organizations. This task force is a collaboration of more than 170 members from around the world. And I'm very thankful to all the co-chairs and the members for a fruitful set of deliberations and outcomes. The goals were set as increased cooperation and collaboration to address global challenges, launch collaborative R&D programs in emerging technologies, and share best practices. I would like to summarize the key recommendations from our task force across 3 pillars. We have compiled a compendium, and Chandra talked about this, with over 125 exemplary case studies from the G20 spanning innovation, technology and R&D. We have identified certain technologies around which we have recommended launch of collaborative R&D programs, and we have also recommended creation of a technology platform for R&D collaboration. Looking at the next level of detail, the compendium consisting of the best practices and case study will be released in our panel tomorrow, so please be there. The themes were grouped into 4 major areas, namely digital, deep and emerging technology, green tech and circular economy, and some foundational domains of influence by creating focused subgroups. Expert volunteers anchored these subgroups to finally arrive at 14 impactful recommendations that have been submitted by our task force. One of the key recommendations from our task force is to set up a virtual digital lab and library as a platform to promote collaboration for R&D, knowledge transfer, and dissemination of the latest information on globally available resources. I will not go through every one of them, but this is available to you. The Internet for all is very important. Under the deep tech and emerging, I will just mention one example, which is to look at collaboration on technology-enabled cancer research. Just one example of how we can use deep tech for collaboration and doing societal good. Under the green tech and circular economy, we have looked at many suggestions that promote supply chain practices to facilitate research on alternative materials, traceability of recycled materials, and to establish global standards for green materials. Under the foundational domain, we have looked at an innovative body for high-tech collaboration to incubate startups. We looked at nurturing ecosystem for transition from TRL3 to TRL7, etc., the Valley of Death, and a center of excellence and human-centered design. We have also come up with a way to institutionalize, and I hope that the B20 Global Institute will take this forward, to build a collaborative platform along with Brazil, and we also recommend that sustain the best practices compendium so that that can be refreshed every year. Now I want to conclude by thanking Accenture, the knowledge partner, the CI Secretariat, Mr. Chandrasekharan, who chaired the entire set of task forces, and all the participants in our deliberations. Without their complete cooperation, we would not have succeeded. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. May I now request the co-chair B20 India Task Force on Digital Transformation, Mr. Rajesh Gopinathan, to make.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of my co-chairs, all right, while they get the slides up, on behalf of my co-chairs on the Digital Transformation Task Force and members from more than 150 participating organizations, it's my pleasure to summarize our deliberations and recommendations to this August audience. Can I have the slides up, please? Our deliberations focused on 4 priority areas. Next slide, please. These cut across what we believe are 4 foundational themes required for digital transformation. First being promoting universal connectivity. Second, ensuring digital literacy and reducing the skill gap. Third, to ensure that we promote digital transformation at the MSME level and take them along with us in this journey rather than depend on technology diffusion and trickle-down effects. And finally, ensure that we promote digital trust by focusing on harmonizing cybersecurity standards. Across these 4 priority areas, the task force has come up with policy recommendations around each of these. Next slide, please. On universal connectivity, the focus has been that we need to think about this as a fundamental foundational layer to ensure transformation happens, and therefore giving access to accelerated, universal, high quality, reliable, future-proof connectivity is going to be critical to ensure that we increase digital penetration and drive sustainable growth across communities and regions. On digital literacy, the main focus that we wanted to make sure was that we drive inclusivity by developing a global minimum standard for digital literacy. which will allow for international skills portability, similar to what Ms. Kamineni spoke about on the digital skills side. And this will be critical for the creation of an inclusive and diverse workforce throughout this entire space on the digital side. Third, on enterprise transformation, our key recommendation is to ensure that we provide sustainable and easily accessible finance available to the MSME sector to ensure that they are able to invest in digital transformation from the go, and that we create enabling foundational platforms that are globally recognized and sector specific to make sure that we drive it, and of course, enabling policy environment around that. And last but not least, coming to the area of digital trust, our recommendations essentially focus on ensuring that we harmonize the plethora of cybersecurity standards and frameworks that exist in the various jurisdictions that we operate in, which are represented by the G20 countries, and to ensure that we provide an easy to adopt and a reliable, resilient framework which will allow cybersecurity across this entire thing and ensure digital trust is built into the whole ecosystem. I will not, in the interest of time, go into the individual recommendations on each of these, or the individual policy recommendations on each of the 4 areas, but the task force felt that we have given about 6 targeted recommendations, but all of them are along the theme of making sure that government and private sector have a collaborative role to play to drive digital transformation, and requesting commonality and forward-looking policy frameworks that are harmonized across the world to ensure cross-border leverage of the opportunity that we have to drive inclusive growth through digital transformation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to now request Mr. Sajjan Jindal, Chair B20 India Task Force on Energy, Climate Change and Resource Efficiency, to please share his recommendations.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Climate change isn't just a headline, it's a reality. And while we see this reality unfolding, paradoxically, our dependence on fossil fuel is on the rise. We are in a race against time, navigating geopolitical challenges and energy crisis, and striving to uphold our commitments under the Paris Agreement. This B20 Summit in India isn't just a gathering of influential minds, it's a melting pot of ideas, ambitions, and the collective will to drive transformation. Now more than ever, it's crucial that we harness this opportunity to amplify our collective voice, to catalyze change on a global scale. Our quest is clear, a sweeping transition to clean energy. This isn't merely an energy shift, it's a social and societal revolution. So what's our mission? A shift to clean energy that's so profound, it will touch every aspect of our lives, our economy, our supply chains, our daily business, even how we power our homes. Our B20 task force knows what's at stake. What we are pushing for can be summarized under 4 broad heads. Firstly, global cooperation for net zero transitions. Our planet doesn't have borders. The mission to embrace clean energy is universal. This is our call for a global alliance, urging nations and industries to collaborate, to innovate, and to make the next generation of clean energy a tangible reality. And it's not just about clean energy. It's about a green future for our supply chains too. Second, ramping up climate finance. Capital is the lifeblood of transformation. We need more of it channelized towards green initiatives. With the right financing, green technologies will not only be the more accessible, but more affordable. Our aim is to provide better financing options that benefit everyone, especially the global South. Third, a just and equitable transition. Clean energy is for all. Our move to a green future must be inclusive and resilient, one that doesn't leave anyone behind. From guaranteeing energy security to championing affordability and fostering gender inclusivity, we are striving for a transition that's comprehensive and compassionate. And finally, promoting circular economy. It's not just about using resources, but doing so wisely, efficiently, and sustainably. We need solid frameworks that prioritize the mainstream resource efficiency. Collaboration is the cornerstone of our mission. By pooling our expertise, knowledge, and passions, we can ignite a change so profound that it doesn't merely benefit a community or a nation, but transcends boundaries, uniting the world in a shared vision of prosperity and sustainability. With unity, collaboration, and shared knowledge, we can spark a change that's not just beneficial to a community, a country, or a continent, but the entire world. In conclusion, I want to express my deepest gratitude to the co-chairs, committee members, and the ever-supportive CII team. It's a collective effort, and together I'm confident we are scripting a better future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jindal. I'd like to now request Mr. Dinesh Kumar Khara, Chair B20 India Task Force on Financial Inclusion and Economic Empowerment, to please speak.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you, distinguished speakers and delegates. It gives me immense pleasure to be before you on a very important subject, which is Task Force on the Financial Inclusion for Economic Empowerment. I would like to begin by thanking all my co-chairs and members, which numbered almost about 100 from many different countries, who have proactively guided the Task Force on Financial Inclusion for Economic Empowerment. Actually, if one really looks at it, financial inclusion as a theme has been a part of B20 deliberations for a very long time. It was first at the Pittsburgh Summit in 2009 that a financial inclusion expert group was constituted. Interestingly, what we have observed is, over the years, concerted efforts have been put in at the B20 platform to advance the financial inclusion. COVID-19 boosted the adoption of the digital financial services since 2020. About 40% of the adults in developing economies, excluding China, are the ones who made a digital merchant banking payment using a card, phone, or the internet. And more than 1/3 of the adults in developing economies who paid a utility bill directly from an account, they did it for the first time after the start of the pandemic. Despite COVID-19 boosting the adoption of the digital financial services, the gap in financial inclusion have widened post-pandemic, especially for developing and least developing countries, as well as for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. The difference in financial inclusion across the countries reflect differences in the level of maturity of ecosystem and enablers, and also the range of products, etc. So in this backdrop, it gives me a great pleasure to share with you some of the policy paper. We had the opportunity of deliberating for the policy paper, which we have developed after numerous discussions. The Global Findex database 2021 of the World Bank estimates that almost 24% of the adults globally do not have access to the formal banking account. Similarly, only 29% of the adults place their savings in the banking system. In a similar vein, micro, small, and medium enterprises are also experiencing increased financial disparities. So in this backdrop, the major task was to really address the challenges, and the key focus areas which were identified was to develop a framework for financial inclusion and economic empowerment, and based on the progress made so far, define the priorities for financial inclusion, and also to make policy recommendations. So 11 key priority themes were identified, and which were essentially in terms of creating the ecosystem and the enablers, product, and also the legal and the regulatory requirements which needs to be improved upon. The key priority themes are essentially relating to the private sector involvement for financial inclusion, digital public infrastructure rollout, capacity building through incubation and literacy, gender and diversity, inclusive finance, reducing cost of borrowing and underserved segments, harnessing power of business correspondent in financial inclusion, targeted interventions for agriculture and rural segments, incentivizing cross-border payments and innovations, increasing insurance, savings and wealth management penetration, enhancing consumer protection, inclusive policy design and governance. The creation of a framework was also suggested to evaluate the performance of the countries of financial inclusion by updating the current frameworks. Further, a B20 Financial Inclusion Secretariat is proposed to provide consultancy guidance to various nations and continuously monitor the progress made on financial inclusion. So these are some of the broad highlights of what the group had carried out. And once again, I take this opportunity to thank all our co-chair and also the participants. And special mention I would like to make is for the PwC team, who were our knowledge partner and who really helped us in completing this task. Thank you very much. All the very best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khara. May I now request Mr. Uday Kotak, the Chair B20 India Task Force on Financing for Global Economic Recovery, to please give his recommendations.
Thank you. I'm going to reduce walk time without increasing talk time. Friends, I think we've seen a whole host of priorities come out in terms of the global self-development goals. I'll talk a little bit about financing of these goals and where is the money going to come from. And my points are essentially three. How much money do we need? Where is it going to come from? And how do we narrow the priorities to achieve the key important goals? So first, in terms of the amount of money required over the next 7 to 10 years is about $4.5 trillion. I see many bankers and financiers in the audience, in addition to some of us on the dais. So I suppose that should not be a big deal. Isn't that correct? $4.5 trillion. So the second point is, how are we going to finance it? And I want to say that here, both from the point of view of our task force, as well as the chair of our, from India, Mr. Chandrasekhar, he said this is B20. Therefore, don't come out with ideas about how governments should finance it. Come out with ideas about how private sector should be really financing it. And that was something which I remember having a discussion with Mr. Amitabh Kant as well. What will private sector do to produce the money rather than advising government how to produce the money? So in terms of private sector, we've got a very specific idea, and I think Chandra referred to it, is the formation of a global acceleration fund. And here I want to share with you the idea which we have actually implemented in India. Every company in India contributes 2% of its profits for CSR. And what we are proposing is a concept for the world, which is every business in the world contributes 0.2% of their profits to social development goals, which are a priority for the world. And I would recommend from India to the policymakers in India, I suppose I have the support of our chair, that out of the 2% requirement of CSR for every Indian business, 0.2% could be our contribution to that global fund, which every country should find a way of contributing to from business. And this could be a game changer, because most of the time, business has the habit of advising well, but not necessarily doing enough from its side. So that is a very significant point of view, and I would recommend the G20 nations to find out ways in which businesses can contribute voluntarily or through regulation or law 0.2% of their profits to this very important transformational goals which we have set out from G20. And I would like the B20 to really take a lead in this in the years ahead. And in terms of narrowing down the priorities, we felt that trying to do everything is expecting too much. And we have narrowed down priorities to 4 areas. One is climate change, second is energy, third is biodiversity, and fourth is ocean pollution. So we, out of the self-development goals, focus on financing these 4 areas: climate change, energy transition, biodiversity, and ocean pollution. The other area which we found a big issue was always domestic financial sector. So we are recommending building of capacity in the domestic financial sector, which is including taxonomy, local regulation for encouraging achievement of self-development goals by businesses and the financial sector in the respective countries. And with this, I would like to say, let's do it well, let's prioritize, and let each of us from business and private sector contribute to the global good. Thank you very much, friends.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kotak. May I now invite the Chair, B20 India Action Council on African Economic Integration, an agenda for global business, Mr. Sunil Bharti Mittal, to please share his recommendations.
Thank you very much. A very good morning to all of you. I am very conscious that we are well over time, and I'll be brief. Hopefully we have a major session this afternoon on Africa Economic Integration Council. First of all, I'd like to really acknowledge and thank Chandra for having led the B20 agenda here in India. B20's job is really to be a feedback mechanism into G20. And having been the chairman of ICC and the part of chairmanship for 7 years, I have deeply been engaged with the B20 process in Turkey, in Germany, in China. And I can tell you most of the time, the stuff that we do in B20 does not necessarily get into the G20 agenda. But every now and then, there are 1 or 2 issues which get picked up and then get carried through all the way through a consensus statement and perhaps execution in the G20 agenda. And that's precisely what we are hoping for here. Somebody like Chandra, who's a very busy body CEO of a very large conglomerate, has given enough time for me to get the confidence that some of the recommendations that will go out of the B20, and some of them are really very powerful, will finally find a very strong echo in the G20 next month. 2 areas of legacy that India would like to leave, and I am personally aware of that. One is the digital. We heard some part of it just now. And the second part that our Prime Minister wants to leave as his personal legacy behind is the Africa agenda. Africa economic integration has been an issue which has been debated at length for the last several decades. It's picking up momentum. You have all seen our Prime Minister deeply engaged with the world leaders to get AU, the Africa Union, as a permanent member of G20. I personally believe we are going to see this happen during this G20, that AU becomes a permanent member. There are a few people who have been invited, like Nigerian president and a few other countries from Africa, but African voice on G20 is now absolutely important. In my own opinion, Africa is the last continent of hope, one of the most populous young continent around the globe, but equally one of the most backward parts of the world. It really needs to get attention, and I'm glad that India will be taking leadership in this particular area. We have made 5 recommendations, and I would like to thank CII Secretariat of having assisted us in this. BCG was our knowledge partner, done a fabulous job, and more importantly, my co-chairs from across Africa and India, who have been very active in putting these recommendations together. We received 100 feedback recommendations from our members and co-chairs, and unanimously we moved forward with these 5 pillars which are presented in front of you today. I will not go into those details. I'll just pick up one and conclude with that. 60% of world's arable and yet uncultivated land is in Africa. Many parts of Africa, I personally travel to Africa a lot, including places like Democratic Republic of Congo. All you need is just throw seeds and crop will grow. The land is so fertile there, yet even that is not being done. Today we are all seeing the crisis that the world is going through on food production, especially with Ukraine getting out of equation of supplying wheat to African nations and many other poorer countries. Prices have soared up. Just adopt Africa as a place to do agriculture and perhaps some value-added agriculture. The entire world can change. 5–10% of that 60% of uncultivated land can dramatically alter the food chain and food ecosystem of the world. In my own, therefore, opinion, India's focus this time in G20 to direct energies towards Africa is the right one. I'll talk more about it in detail this afternoon, but once again, I would like to thank all our business leaders who have been part of this B20 agenda, of having very strongly put together a very, very, very keen recommendations for G20 to look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mittal. May I now request the President, Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, Mr. R. Dinesh, to please.
Thank you. On behalf of the ESG Action Council, I would like to present this. There is little doubt that ESG has moved from being a social responsibility to a competitive differentiator. The question which this council was trying to address was how can we speed up the adoption and how do we make sure that the greater number of organizations actually adopt this as a practice. When we looked at the issues which were highlighted, it came out that there were challenges with regard to the frameworks and the standards, especially with regard to the number of reporting formats which were there. There were 30 disclosure frameworks, 16 sustainability reporting frameworks, and therefore there was a need for bringing in the standard terminologies, definitions, and objectives which could make sure that interoperability and avoid concerns on greenwashing, etc. The second was how do we bring mandates and market incentives to push companies to adopt ESG principles because they were clearly absent. Third, the widely used frameworks did not take into account or give recognition for the priorities of the Global South on adaptation, resilience, to manage transition risks, rural livelihoods, and also damage to property, etc. Therefore, the overarching approach to the policy recommendations were actually broadly four. First, how do we make sure that we have universally adaptable ESG standards and disclosures? By this, we don't mean standards being common, but making sure that we harmonize them and considering the context and needs of the Global South being kept in mind. Promote a level playing field on the harmonized standards, definitions, and of course the taxonomies by both covering developing and emerging markets, large and small businesses, and most importantly, the supply chains. Third would be on accelerate adoption of ESG through the necessary incentives and make sure we reward organizations that do not necessarily follow the ESG practices for themselves, but work with their MSME partners and make them part of this journey. Lastly, the Action Council felt the need to build resilience in the near and medium term to counter the climate transition risks while we continue to maintain the focus on net zero. I think the chair has already mentioned about the institute, and we believe that this could be one way by which these policy recommendations are actually followed through. So let me then finish by thanking all of the co-chairs who have been part of this. We have had 5 country co-chairs who have been worked with us. And very interestingly, we managed to not only speak to various businesses, but also the regulatory agencies in India and other countries to get this background done. So we have had Deloitte and the B20 Secretariat CII supporting us throughout this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the B20 India Task Force and Action Council chairs. I'd like to now request the B20 chair, Mr. N. Chandrasekaran, to please make the concluding remarks.
Thank you. I will just take a minute. You've heard from all the chairs on the key recommendations. The chairs, their co-chairs and members are all attending the conference. Hope you'll have an opportunity to engage so that we can get the recommendations discussed a little more deeply in the informal settings. I have a number of people to thank for. First, I want to thank all the co-chairs, chairs, and their teams for the passion and the effort they put in coming up with this consensus set of recommendations. Second, I want to thank CII, particularly Chandrajit Banerjee and his staff for being available 24/7 for this 7 months and coordinating and making sure that every input is captured along with their knowledge partners of the different councils. And I particularly want to thank the International Advisory Caucus, global leaders who gave their time very generously and also took the time to write to us whenever something had to be detailed. Their inputs have been extremely invaluable. Finally, I want to thank G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, who has been of enormous support and strength to help us do this exercise over the last 9 months. But Amitabh, we are going to require a lot more support from you in pushing this agenda with the G20. Counting on that. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, sir. May I request you, sir, please, to present a token of appreciation to all our task force chairs and Action Council chairs. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We just quickly make those presentations, and we'll request them to just gather together for a group photograph, and then we move on to the next session. We've got Mr. Amitabh Kant here already. Please be